So welcome BookTube viewers. I'm going to start a new tag that may or may not catch on, and I recently did a tag about the first book I read, but this is going to be the last 10 books, so it's going to come at it from the other end, the most current aspect of your reading. So the first question is, the last book you didn't finish. I think it was probably, I tend to battle on to the end of most books, but the one I didn't was the Booker Prize winning A Brief History of Seven Killings. I think I probably got about a third of the way through it. And while it was informative and sort of formally took some risks, I didn't see it sort of moving on and developing any across the rest of the book, so I gave up after about a third. It just seemed to be more of the same, which may be very unfair. And in fact, I may one day go back to it. But I just, it's a big book, ironically called A Brief History. And I just kind of got ground down by it in the end. So it was that book. Question 2, the last book you reread. Well, I said before, I don't really reread books because I feel I don't have time because there's so many other books I want to read. But there are a couple that sort of serve as sort of Bibles, I suppose, for want of a better word, or sort of meditation for sort of inspiration. And the one I've most recently reread, although it be a few years ago now, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, was a book called Some 40 Tales of the Afterlife by David Eagleman. Now, I've said before on one of my other videos that David Eagleman is a brain scientist. He studies the human brain, but he has written this fiction book, which is a collection of 40 very short stories, about sort of 3-4 pages long each. And they explore the relationship of man, the divine, and the sort of microscopic and the atomic. So it's messing with scale the whole way through. And I've described it as not sort of mind-bending, but sort of mind-expanding, because it really makes you think about different perspectives. And it's just great. It's a really good read, and it's an easy read because it's quite short. As I say, each story is only about 3 or 4 pages. So that's one that, if I sort of want to think about sort of scale and perspective, I might go back and read again. Question 3, what was the last book you bought? Okay, well, there's 2 I bought. One which won't come till April, I think it's actually released, and that's by Magnus Mills, called The Forensic Record Society. And you think with a title like that, it's going to be, crime, detective sort of genre. But from the blurb, and I hope this is the case, and I haven't bought it in error, it's actually about a guy who's sort of completely OCD about his record collection, which harkens back to a stage in my life. That's when people used to buy music on vinyl and not have it on their phones. So that sounds right up my street, unless I've misinterpreted it, and it is forensic detective, that sort of thing. And the other is Jarett Kobek. Now, I posted a video, which I'll post a link to again here, calling for your help, where I'm a big fan of Jarett Kobek's, having read 2 of his books recently. And his latest book is on a subject that I have no interest in, which is the New York club scene of the 80s. And I asked your opinions as to, did I risk sort of Kobek going down in my estimation because I end up reading the book, and because it's on a theme I'm not interested in, that Kobek goes down a notch in my estimation? Or do I just steer clear and trust my own judgment that I'm not interested in this subject? Or is he such a good writer that he makes even a subject I have no interest in, fantastic because of his writing? So that's still ongoing. I'm still sort of interested in your responses for, if you've had similar experiences about writers you like, but a book of theirs sounds like it's not going to be of interest. But I've solved it in the short term because I found another book of his for me to read, which I've just ordered today, which is called If You Won't Read, Then Why Should I Write?, which is a brilliant title. And it's basically about the internet, how it sort of changed our reading habits, and people don't read sort of long fiction anymore. And I haven't read it, obviously, but I think what it is basically he's constructed a book by culling internet posts, particularly sex chat online, I think. And he's going to turn that around back on the internet, saying, this is the level of literacy and, that we've sunk to because we don't read books. And, how it's changed our whole sort of human interaction and relationships, how we relate to one another. that, by being online. So I'm really looking forward to that. And as I say, it does solve my short-term need for a fix of Jarett Kobek. Okay, question 4. The last book you said you read but didn't. Okay, well, that's Ulysses, which I imagine is the answer for any sort of literary fiction writer like me. I can't imagine it be any other book. Okay, question 5. The last book you wrote in the margins of. Okay, well, I've never written in the margins of novels. I have written in the margins of non-fiction books when I'm doing research or whatever, but I've read very little non-fiction in the last 2 years. I find myself relying less and less on research in books, more trusted to my own imagination, plus maybe a bit of Wikipedia. So I haven't written for a long time in the margins of books. The closest that I could equate that to is a book called Darkenville's Cat by Alexander Theroux, which is this wonderfully sort of modern Gothic sprawling tale of an academic in, I think it was Virginia in the USA. But the thing is, there's so many words in there that I've never come across. Some of them are sort of neologisms that he sort of made up, but a lot of them are just, sort of refer back to sort of Latin and Greek. And in the end, there were so many, because I kept stopping and I'd go and look them up. And in the end, there were so many, I was doing it so frequently, I said, no, forget this. And I opened up a file on my computer and I just typed the words as I found them. I didn't look them up at that stage. And then when I finished the book, I spent a glorious 2 hours decanting some of these words. And, some of them are fantastic and I've since used them myself. So it was a very worthwhile exercise. Question 6. What was the last book that you had signed? I've only ever had one book signed, at least to the best of my knowledge, and that's I've mentioned that before. If you watch my video, the virtual tour of my diffuse library, which means that all my books are in the shed outside, in there I show that I have a novel by the science fiction writer Jeff Noon called Vert, which was his first novel, and to celebrate its 25th anniversary, he had a creative. Tell a story in one tweet, and this is back in the days of 140 characters, not 280, on a science fiction theme, and I entered and I won. So he sent me the book and signed it, which was brilliant. I hadn't actually read I've read quite a lot of Jeff Noon, but I hadn't read that one, and so I read the signed copy, and it was great. So that was a pleasantly surprising thing all round. Question 7: the last book you lost. Okay, this is a slightly weird story, I guess. So when my father died, he had a mistress cum lover, whatever you want to call her, and she wanted to keep up the relationship with my kids, who are obviously my late father's grandchildren. So we sort of, in the year after his death, we occasionally met up, went out for a meal, the four of us, and she was always very supportive of reading. She knows I'm a writer. But we'd always go to a bookshop and she'd buy my two boys a book and offer to buy me one. So on one of those occasions, I bought the Book of Strange New Things by Michel Faber. It had just come out. And it's a fantastic book, in my all-time top 20. And I said to her, oh, this is so good, you have to read it. So I lent it back to her. And in the interim, without telling me, she'd arranged for the stonemasons to take my mother's name. My mother is still alive. Take my mother's name off the gravestone. It had already been agreed that this mistress her name was going to be on the gravestone, so that wasn't contentious. But she had my mother's name removed, which caused all sorts of difficulties for when the gravestone was finally erected. The ceremony around it, which I won't go into. But basically, I cut off all contact with her, which meant she still had the book. So in the end, I had to go and buy my own copy of it anyway. I'd read it, but it was so good I wanted a copy of it to keep. So that was the last book I lost, even though I know exactly where it is, but I'm never going to get it back. And question 8, the last book you had to replace. Well, see the above story. It's the Book of Strange New Things by Michel Faber. Number 9, the last book you had an argument over. Probably the book club I went to, because they chose, it was really difficult because it was a mixture of genre readers and literary fiction readers like myself. I don't really read genre. And I was sort of perennially grateful that the host of the meeting, who ran it, of the book club, she managed to find books that sort of crossed the divide, at least in theory. But the first two we had, one was Matt Haig's The Humans, and the others was Naomi Alderman's The Power, which both sort of sci-fi stroke pretensions to literary fiction. And I hated them both, and I argued vociferously for that fact. I've got a half a dedicated video to the Naomi Alderman one, so I'll post the link to that. And the Matt Haig I mentioned in my no disclaimers tag under overrated writers. So I don't need to go into any more detail, really. Question 10. The last book you couldn't get hold of. Well, this is another weird tale. So those of you who regularly tune into my BookTube videos know I'm hugely moved by music. It's a very important part of my life, probably as important as literature. And in the 90s, I think, one of my favourite bands was a band called Swans from New York, who just played this, really sort of heavy trance-like rock. I mean, it wasn't sort of dance trance music, sort of through keyboards and stuff. It was through guitar and bass, really slowed down and repetitive, and it was great. And he had really interesting lyrics, because what he does is he writes sort of these little short story type things about, and then he takes out all the any extra detail, so it just becomes the relationship of you, I, and the verb. Which is normally one sort of underlining a power relationship between them. So they're really pared down spare lyrics. And I found out he'd written a book of short stories, but couldn't seem to get hold of it anywhere. And I found out the address of either his home address or his office in New York. So I sent him in an airmail envelope. I don't know if you still remember those. The sort of Par Avion, and they were blue, and they sort of had chevrons around the borders, sort of red and white chevrons. And I put in a $20 note, and I said, "Dear Michael, I know I shouldn't be sending money through the post, but I can't get hold of your book called The Consumer. Please could you send me one? I hope this covers it." And I never heard anything for absolute ages. I thought, I've done my money. Either he's kept it, or that wasn't the right address, or someone else opened it and kept the money, or whatever. I didn't really think anything more of it. And then, probably a year later, I received this airmail envelope addressed to me, and I opened it up, and there was nothing in it. And I thought, that's odd. There was no return address or anything. And then I saw it had been typed all along the border of the chevrons. So it sort of typed it sort of vertically down, then horizontally across, and then vertically up. And he typed, "If you shouldn't, don't." And that was it. That was the message. Again, pared down minimalism. And rather than being sort of outraged that he'd nicked my $20, I just thought, no, this is, A, I deserved it, but B, yeah, this is fitting somehow. And I was absolutely fine and happy that this had been the outcome. Unfortunately, to this day, I've still not tracked down this book, although it does exist on, you can get it online, but it's enormously expensive. And the other thing is, you have to be careful that it's not the German version, because I don't read German. And on 2 different occasions, I've almost ended up buying the German version because it was cheap and I thought it was a good deal. And then I realised it was the German version. So that book is sort of the bane of my life, really. 30, 40 years later, no, not 40, 30 years later, I still haven't been able to read it. So that's the book I cannot get hold of. And that's it. Those are the 10 questions on your last 10 books. Anyone can obviously feel free to join in the tag, but I'm specifically going to invite and tag some new BookTube friends I've made this week and in the sort of last 10 days. One is Dane Reads, who just has an enormously brilliant output. I mean, I don't know if there's any booktuber who puts more online than he does, and it's just all great stuff. He does lots of tags as well. The next is Hooked on Books, who is based in London. She's originally from Northern Ireland, and she's probably the most natural, unaffected presenter on BookTube I've come across. She's just great, it just says it how it is. and there's no pretense at all about her. I mean, she obviously has a love of books, and she works in a bookshop. And I can't remember exactly on what discussion we were having online, but I said how it's a shame that all bookshops now seem to rely heavily on merchandise, things like Jane Austen branded soap and things like that. And she says, I know what you mean, but actually, because no one in bookshops actually likes that stuff either, no one will deal with it. So in the bookshop she works in, it's fallen to her to deal with it. So I felt slightly chastened by that. But she's fantastic, and Shazza is her name. So I'm tagging her. And the last one is Todd the Librarian, who, as I've started to sort of discover booktubers and who's connected to who and who follows who, a lot of the leads come back to Todd the Librarian, and I know he's very sort of active on things like tags and stuff. So I'm tagging those 3 people, but as I say, anyone is free to do it. And there you have it, the last 10 books. Okay, till next time, thanks.